On the night of February 1, 1959, 9 hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute vanished into the frozen wilderness of the northern Ural Mountains. What was supposed to be a simple winter ski expedition became one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century, a story shrouded in secrecy, speculation, and horror. The group, led by the meticulous and charismatic Igor Dyatlov, had spent years preparing for such an adventure. They were experienced, disciplined, and united in their pursuit of the highest grade in ski hiking. Yet, no amount of training could have prepared them for what awaited on the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, a name in the language of the Mansi people meaning Mountain of the Dead. It was a mountain locals avoided, a mountain that seemed to carry a weight of foreboding that outsiders could never sense until it was too late. The hikers left Sverdlovsk on January 23, 1959, a cheerful group of students and graduates. Alongside Dyatlov were 9 others: Zinaida Kolmogorova, Rustem Slobodin, Ludmila Dubinina, Yuri Doroshenko, Yuri Krivonischenko, Nikolai Thibeaux-Brignol, Alexander Kolevatov, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Yuri Yudin, who would turn back early due to illness. Their equipment was thorough: skis, backpacks, heavy coats, boots, a homemade stove, cameras, and a detailed log for every step of the expedition. They carried optimism, laughter, and a sense of invincibility that would prove tragically misplaced. The journey began smoothly. Diaries and photographs captured laughter, skiing across untouched snowfields, and the playful camaraderie of youth. They ventured deeper into the mountains, climbing slopes and crossing valleys, always tracking toward Mount Otorten. Yudin, unable to continue, left on January 28, unaware that his decision would make him the last person to see his friends alive. With 9 hikers continuing, the expedition pressed on, seemingly undaunted by the harsh weather that would later become one of the many factors in the mystery. By January 31, the hikers established a camp at the edge of a sparse forest. Their route had diverged from the planned valley, taking them directly onto the bare slope of Kholat Syakhl. Here, in the hours before disaster, they pitched their tent in an unusual and dangerous location, seemingly on instinct or perhaps compelled by the subtle manipulation of fate. Snow fell heavily, winds howled, and the cold pressed in like an invisible weight. They were meticulous in every preparation, yet unseen forces would soon render their precautions meaningless. On the night of February 1, the tent was found weeks later slashed from the inside. No one knows what compelled 9 experienced hikers to abandon their shelter and run barefoot into a storm that would strip them of life within hours. Searchers would later trace footprints that led into the forest, some showing signs of improvised foot coverings or socks, others bare, vulnerable, yet determined to move. The evidence of panic was unmistakable, but the cause remained elusive. The first bodies were discovered near a cedar tree at the edge of the forest. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko were found, frozen, stripped of protective clothing, their hands clawed raw as if scratching at unseen forces. They had built a small fire in a futile attempt to stave off the freezing cold. The trees above showed broken branches, evidence of frantic climbing or desperate attempts to escape a threat that never revealed itself. Doroshenko and Krivonischenko perished there, leaving no explanation behind. 3 more bodies, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, were discovered nearby, partially dressed, lying in positions suggesting they were attempting to return to the tent. Their deaths were consistent with hypothermia, yet anomalies already began to emerge. The remaining 4 bodies, Dubinina, Kolevatov, Thibeaux-Brignol, and Zolotaryov, were found much later in a ravine, beneath several meters of snow. Their injuries were severe: crushed ribs, shattered skulls, missing eyes and tongue, all occurring without external trauma consistent with such force. Some clothing contained traces of radiation, an unexplainable detail that would fuel speculation for decades. The Soviet investigation closed quickly, attributing the deaths to an unknown compelling force. Families were left with vague explanations. Witnesses reported restrictions on accessing the area, whispers of military involvement, and signs that the tragedy had been deliberately minimized. Speculation grew, blending into folklore and conspiracy. Was this the result of a misfired military test? A secret weapon? A cosmic anomaly? Or something far older and darker, tied to the mountain itself? Accounts of glowing orbs in the sky near the time of the incident, coupled with indigenous Mansi legends about the Mountain of the Dead, added layers of terror. Some suggested that infrasound produced by wind across the slopes induced panic, driving the hikers to flee. Others believed they had encountered an unknown entity or force capable of exerting immense pressure without leaving conventional wounds. Every theory had its shortcomings. None could fully explain the combination of hypothermia, bizarre injuries, radiation, and the psychological state of the hikers. Survivor Yuri Yudin carried the burden of memory for the rest of his life. He spoke of dreams haunted by his friends, of the impossibility of reconciling what he saw with what he understood. The diaries, photographs, and final notes provide tantalizing glimpses but no answers. Dyatlov's last diary entry was mundane, noting weather conditions and the choice to pitch the tent on the slope. Hours later, that tent would be torn from the inside. The mountain, storm, and snow hold their secrets. Decades later, renewed investigations attempted to apply modern scientific methods. Avalanche theory, computer modeling of slope dynamics, and environmental analyses suggested plausible natural explanations, yet could not account for the anomalous injuries or radiation. Military involvement remained speculative but plausible, given the region's history of secret tests. UFO theories, folklore, and infrasound hypotheses persisted, capturing the imagination and horror of those who study the case. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains a haunting reflection of the unknown. The combination of human error, environmental extremity, political secrecy, and possibly unexplainable phenomena renders it unsolved. The faces of the hikers, captured in photographs full of youth and hope, contrast with the final brutality of their deaths. Visitors to the pass today encounter a landscape that appears serene, almost empty, yet charged with the memory of inexplicable horror. The mountain keeps its secrets, and the footprints in the snow have long vanished. Even the simplest questions, why they abandoned the tent, why they ran barefoot into the storm, why some bodies were found with impossible injuries, remain unanswered. Theories abound, each with fragments of plausibility, but none provide certainty. The Dyatlov Pass is a mirror, reflecting not only the tragedy itself but our fear of what cannot be known, the anxiety that some truths are buried forever in snow, silence, and shadows. And so, the hikers remain frozen in time. Their story, a blend of fact, rumor, and terror, continues to captivate, disturb, and provoke speculation. For those who study it, the mountain is not just a geological formation but a repository of questions that defy resolution. Koletsyakal keeps its secrets, the wind whispers, and the snow erases all traces, yet the mystery endures. What compelled 9 young people into the frozen night? Was it nature, human error, an experiment, or a force beyond understanding? Perhaps the answer will never come, and the past will remain, as it has for centuries, a silent witness to inexplicable horror. The cold of the Ural Mountains is not just physical, it presses on the mind, distorting perception, heightening fear. The night of February 1st was merciless. Wind howled across the slope, and snow fell like fine needles. The hikers, experienced though they were, faced a terror that no training could anticipate. Diaries recovered later hint at a strange unease, a tension not entirely attributable to weather. Some entries describe unusual sounds, almost like distant explosions or the crackle of ice shifting beneath the mountain, yet nothing concrete. Whatever it was, it prompted them to leave the tent hastily. They fled into darkness, following footprints that cut erratically through deep snow. Some stumbled over logs, others left signs of digging or clawing, as though fighting an invisible force. They attempted to reach the forest, hoping for shelter, fire, or warmth. The first 2 bodies were found beneath a cedar tree, frozen, their hands clawed raw. Evidence of a small fire showed their desperation. They had tried to survive, to generate warmth, to stave off hypothermia. Yet the injuries suggested more than cold. Some wounds hinted at a sudden, violent force, an unseen pressure that bent bones and tore flesh without leaving external bruising. 3 more bodies were discovered near the edge of the forest, partially dressed. Dyatlov's own face, frozen in a grimace of determination or pain, indicated he had tried to return to the tent. Kolmogorova and Slobodin were nearby, exhibiting similar signs of struggle. The remaining 4 bodies were found in a ravine under meters of snow. Their injuries were catastrophic: crushed ribs, shattered skulls, and in some cases, missing eyes and tongue. Autopsies later revealed traces of radiation, unexplained bruising patterns, and evidence suggesting that at least some were alive when subjected to extreme trauma. The Soviet investigation quickly concluded that some unknown, compelling force had caused their deaths, closing the case with minimal explanation. Official documents were sealed, witnesses warned to stay silent, and locals whispered stories of strange lights in the mountains, of soldiers who vanished, of tests and experiments no one could confirm. Some of the hikers' clothing was found to have radioactive traces, and the terrain itself seemed to have been the scene of undisclosed military activity. These anomalies only fueled speculation: was this a natural disaster, a misfired experiment, a secret weapon, or something far older and darker, tied to the mountain itself? Witnesses reported unusual lights in the sky, glowing orbs that moved erratically above the slopes. These were interpreted variously as experimental rockets, UFOs, or strange atmospheric phenomena. Indigenous Mansi folklore spoke of Kolat-Syakal as cursed, a place where spirits exacted vengeance on the unwary. Modern researchers have considered infrasound, a natural phenomenon in which wind passing over the mountain generates frequencies capable of inducing panic, irrational fear, and even hallucinations. Could 9 experienced hikers have succumbed simultaneously to such effects? Perhaps. But this theory cannot explain the extreme trauma, radiation, or the internal logic that drove them to abandon their tent in partial clothing into lethal cold. Survivor Yuri Yudin carried the haunting memory of the group. He saw his friends' faces in nightmares, relived the images of bodies frozen in snow, and bore witness to the inconsistencies in the official reports. Diaries, photographs, and recovered notes provide glimpses into their final hours, yet these fragments only deepen the mystery. Dyatlov's last diary entry was ordinary, noting weather and camp location, yet within hours, that tent was torn from the inside. Something, or someone, had forced 9 young, capable individuals into a sequence of events that led inexorably to death. As decades passed, the world's fascination with Dyatlov Pass grew. Documentaries, books, and articles analyzed the photographs, maps, and reports. Attempts at modern scientific explanations included avalanche modeling, climate analysis, and examination of slope dynamics. While these provided some plausible scenarios for hypothermia or panic, none accounted for crushed bones, missing eyes, or unexplained radiation. Military involvement remained speculative, though possible given the region's history. UFO enthusiasts, folklorists, and paranormal theorists continue to offer explanations, each more elaborate than the last, each highlighting the gaps in understanding. The hiker's story is one of contrasts, youthful joy and brutal death, meticulous planning and incomprehensible final acts. Their faces, captured in photographs, smile in innocence and anticipation of adventure. Yet the snow-covered slope where they died is silent, empty, and indifferent. Visitors today see only serene mountains, untouched snow, and a landscape that appears benign, yet holds the memory of inexplicable horror. Footprints, tent, fire, and bodies are gone, all that remains are questions, unanswered, persistent, haunting. Even with modern reconstructions and investigations, the Dyatlov Pass incident defies closure. Why did they cut the tent from the inside? Why flee into sub-zero temperatures barefoot? Why were some bodies crushed or mutilated in ways that suggest overwhelming pressure without visible external trauma? These questions remain, as do countless theories that range from plausible human error to secret Soviet operations to cosmic or supernatural forces. The mountain seems to hold its secrets with deliberate intent, erasing evidence and leaving fragments for those daring enough to investigate. Some argue that the hikers stumbled upon a clandestine Soviet experiment, a weapon test gone awry, or surveillance operation that required lethal enforcement. Others insist they encountered phenomena beyond human understanding, a natural event, a rare atmospheric anomaly, or an entity unknown to science. Each theory seeks to impose order on chaos, yet none can explain the combination of fear, trauma, and mystery. Survivor Yudin insisted until his death that he had glimpsed something incomprehensible, something that had driven his friends into the storm. He was spared not by design but by circumstance, illness that prevented him from joining the last leg of the expedition. His survival became a burden, a constant confrontation with a question he could never answer: what truly happened on Kholat Syakhl? Decades later, renewed investigations tried to reconcile the contradictions. Avalanches, wind forces, infrasound, and environmental conditions were studied, but anomalies remained. The severe internal injuries, missing body parts, and radioactive traces continued to defy conventional explanation. Theories of military tests or accidental encounters with unknown forces persisted, further deepening the narrative into speculation and horror. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains more than an unsolved mystery. It is a reflection of human fear and curiosity, of our desire to confront the unknown and impose explanations on the incomprehensible. The mountain itself becomes a character, a silent, indifferent force that shapes events beyond understanding. Visitors tread lightly, aware of the history, sensing the lingering echoes of the 9 who vanished, frozen in a moment where nature, secrecy, and possibly supernatural forces intersected with tragic precision. Their story is a warning: preparation, skill, and optimism cannot always protect against forces beyond comprehension. Whether the cause was natural, human, or something else entirely, the deaths of the 9 hikers remain an enduring enigma. The photographs, diaries, and artifacts serve as fragments of a truth that may never be fully known. Yet these fragments continue to inspire study, speculation, and fascination, preserving the legacy of 9 lives ended too soon, in a place where the ordinary rules of survival, physics, and logic seem suspended. As the decades passed, the Dyatlov Pass incident grew into more than just a historical footnote. It became a symbol of human vulnerability in the face of unknown forces, a case that defies both logic and imagination. Scholars, adventurers, and thrill-seekers attempted to reconstruct the events, using diaries, photographs, and topographic maps. They calculated wind speeds, slope angles, and snow density, yet none of these factors could fully account for the combination of behaviors, injuries, and environmental anomalies. It seemed as if the hikers had encountered a convergence of conditions so rare and intense that ordinary cause and effect could not explain their fates. Some researchers posited that a sudden, localized avalanche had forced the hikers to abandon the tent. While plausible in terms of hypothermia and panic, this explanation could not account for the more bizarre elements. The internal crushing injuries, the missing eyes and tongue, and the radiation traces in clothing suggested either a previously unknown physical phenomenon or deliberate human interference. Military involvement seemed possible, given the region's use as a testing ground for secret weapons, missiles, and radioactivity experiments during the late 1950s. Witness reports of strange lights and explosions lend credence to this theory, but no official records confirm it, and the evidence remains circumstantial. Other theories delve into the psychological and environmental. The mountain itself may have played a role beyond its slopes and snow. Local Mansi legends describe Kholat Syakhl as cursed, inhabited by malevolent spirits. Infrasound, a rare natural occurrence where wind passing through mountain crevices generates frequencies that induce panic, vertigo, and hallucinations, has been suggested as a factor. Researchers have demonstrated that infrasound at certain thresholds can provoke irrational fear and uncontrollable flight responses in humans. Yet even this cannot explain the extreme trauma or selective nature of the injuries. How could sound alone crush ribs or shatter skulls without leaving marks on the skin? More speculative explanations extend into the realm of the supernatural. UFO sightings near the Ural Mountains around the same period were reported by locals and military personnel. Witnesses described glowing orbs hovering or darting across the sky, sometimes disappearing and reappearing with impossible speed. Could the hikers have inadvertently encountered such phenomena? Could exposure to unknown energy or radiation have produced both psychological terror and physical damage? These questions are difficult to answer, yet they have fueled a persistent narrative of something unearthly at Kholat Syakhl. Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor, offered a human perspective that no model or theory can replicate. His experience was unique. He witnessed his friend's preparation and departure, yet avoided the fatal slope due to illness. For the rest of his life, he carried the weight of unanswered questions. He described vivid dreams where the hikers appeared, frozen and silent, their expressions filled with unspoken knowledge of the horrors they encountered. Yudin's testimony suggests that whatever struck the hikers was instantaneous, overwhelming, and incomprehensible, leaving a psychic imprint on those connected to the event. The autopsies revealed anomalies that remain central to speculation. Some bodies exhibited signs of severe internal trauma, as if compressed by immense force. Others had high levels of radioactive isotopes on clothing and skin, suggesting exposure to a source not found in the immediate environment. Bruises inconsistent with environmental hazards, the selective removal of organs, and evidence of hypothermic paradoxical undressing, the phenomenon where victims of extreme cold remove their clothing, contribute to a narrative that defies conventional explanation. Each detail reinforces a picture of an event that is partially natural, partially human, and partially unknown. Throughout the late 20th century, interest in Dyatlov Pass intensified. Researchers published books, produced documentaries, and revisited Soviet archives as declassification permitted. Yet official explanations remained vague. The Soviet narrative emphasized an unknown compelling force, but offered no elaboration. The ambiguity allowed speculation to flourish, and the mountain itself became a symbol, a locus of fear, mystery, and fascination. Those who dared to explore the pass reported feelings of unease, disorientation, and even auditory hallucinations, echoes, some claimed, of the original event. Modern investigations attempted to use computational models and environmental simulations to reconstruct the hikers' final movements. Wind patterns, snow stability, and terrain features were analyzed extensively. While such research demonstrates that natural forces could contribute to panic and rapid movement, it fails to account for several anomalies: the internal injuries, the missing body parts, the radiation, and the behavior of the hikers in the moments before death. Even with advanced science, the case retains gaps that resist closure. The Dyatlov Pass incident occupies a unique space where history, folklore, science, and speculation intersect. It challenges assumptions about human behavior, environmental hazards, and the limits of understanding. While some explanations may appear plausible in isolation, the full combination of factors defies resolution. Avalanches, infrasound, human panic, secret military operations, radiation, or supernatural entities, any single factor explains parts of the story but not its entirety. The mystery persists because the event occurred at the intersection of multiple forces, some known, some concealed, and some perhaps beyond comprehension. Visitors to the site today encounter a serene, snow-covered landscape that belies the terror of February 1959. Footprints vanish in minutes under fresh snow. The slope appears gentle, almost ordinary, yet the memory of the 9 hikers' demise imbues it with an unspoken menace. Photographs of the hikers, recovered from cameras, show them laughing, skiing, and resting. The juxtaposition with the outcome is chilling. Their joy, innocence, and meticulous planning contrast starkly with the unexplained brutality of their deaths, creating a narrative tension that continues to captivate historians, paranormal enthusiasts, and the public alike. The case has entered the cultural imagination, inspiring films, novels, and documentaries, often emphasizing the eerie and conspiratorial aspects. Each retelling amplifies the mystery: strange lights, missing organs, radioactive clothing, military secrecy, folklore warnings, infrasound-induced panic, or cosmic forces. Even today, researchers debate whether the combination of natural and human-made hazards can account for all phenomena observed. The mountain seems to resist definitive explanation, a silent sentinel preserving its secrets under layers of snow and time. The legacy of Dyatlov Pass is also human. The families of the hikers endured decades of uncertainty, suppressed grief, and incomplete information. The psychological toll on Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor, was profound. His lifetime testimony underscores the impossibility of fully comprehending the event. Yet the story persists because it challenges our perception of what is possible, demonstrating that even the most prepared, skilled, and careful humans can fall victim to forces beyond understanding. Ultimately, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains an enigma. It is a confluence of cold, fear, secrecy, and perhaps the inexplicable. Each theory, natural disaster, human intervention, experimental technology, or supernatural forces, captures a fragment of truth, but none encompass the whole. The mountain holds the answers tightly, revealing only fragments, photographs, diaries, and bodies frozen in time. Those fragments inspire fascination, fear, and speculation. They remind us that some events resist comprehension, that human understanding has limits, and that some secrets are buried forever in snow, silence, and shadow. Even decades later, the Dyatlov Pass incident continues to elude full understanding. Modern investigators, equipped with technology unimaginable in 1959, have retraced the hikers' route, analyzed snow and wind patterns, and simulated avalanches and slope instability. Yet every new piece of evidence seems to raise more questions than it answers. The bodies themselves, their injuries, and the traces of radiation remain partially unexplained, defying attempts to fit them neatly into any single theory. The mountain itself has become an enduring symbol of the limits of human knowledge, a place where the ordinary rules of physics, biology, and reason seem to falter. The hikers' personal items, recovered cameras, and diaries offer glimpses into their personalities and the mundane details of their final days. Photographs capture laughter, camaraderie, and moments of peace in a harsh environment. Notes and logs reveal careful planning and meticulous attention to detail. Yet all of these human elements collide violently with the incomprehensible events that followed, producing a story that is both familiar and alien, comforting in its relatability and terrifying in its unpredictability. Some researchers argue for a convergence of natural and human-induced causes. Perhaps a small, unexpected avalanche caused the hikers to flee, and in the chaos, injuries occurred due to falls, exposure, and panic. Infrasound from wind, psychological stress, or even simple misjudgment could have compounded the situation. Yet these explanations, while plausible for some aspects, cannot account for the extreme trauma, selective mutilations, or traces of radiation that remain unexplained. Every model, no matter how sophisticated, leaves gaps, and those gaps have become the breeding ground for speculation, folklore, and conspiracy. The mountain itself has acquired a personality of sorts, as if it is a silent participant in the tragedy. The name Kolat-Syakhl, Mountain of the Dead, is more than a linguistic curiosity, it is a warning. Locals have long avoided the area, reporting strange phenomena, unnatural sounds, and feelings of unease. The hikers, coming from outside this context, may have been unprepared for environmental or psychological factors invisible to them. But preparation alone could not account for what ultimately befell them. Something occurred that combined the ordinary with the extraordinary, producing an event that was both inevitable and inexplicable. Yuri Yudin, the 10th member who survived due to illness, lived with the shadow of the incident for the rest of his life. His testimony highlights the human dimension of the mystery, the psychological trauma, the persistent questions, and the haunting memories that accompany survival. Yudin described seeing his friends' faces in dreams, recalling the events with a mixture of clarity and incomprehensibility. He was a living connection to the hikers, and yet even he could offer no definitive answers. His experience serves as a reminder that the truth may be fundamentally inaccessible, preserved only in fragments of memory, photographs, and physical traces buried in snow. Over the years, the Dyatlov Pass incident has inspired a wealth of theories. UFOs, secret military experiments, meteorological anomalies, and psychological effects have all been suggested. Folklore and indigenous warnings add an additional layer of unease, suggesting that forces older than human civilization may have been at work. Yet none of these explanations alone is sufficient. The truth, if it can ever be known, likely lies at the intersection of multiple phenomena. Environmental hazards, human psychology, military secrecy, and possibly the unknown. The cultural impact of the incident is profound. Books, documentaries, and films have revisited the story repeatedly, emphasizing its eerie, conspiratorial, and speculative dimensions. Each retelling adds color and interpretation, but the core mystery remains untouched. Photographs of the hikers laughing and skiing are juxtaposed against their frozen bodies, creating a tension between life and death, expectation and horror. The site itself, though serene today, holds an aura of unresolved terror, a landscape that appears benign but retains the memory of inexplicable tragedy. Scientific attempts to explain the incident often encounter the same obstacles, variables that cannot be measured, conditions that cannot be replicated, and human factors that resist quantification. The extreme injuries, paradoxical behaviors, and environmental anomalies defy simple categorization. Investigators who return to the past frequently report feelings of disorientation, unease, and the sense that the mountain itself observes their presence. This subjective aspect reinforces the narrative that Kholat-Syakhl is not just a site of historical interest but a locus of ongoing psychological and possibly metaphysical influence. Even now, decades after the event, each new theory is met with scrutiny and skepticism. Some experts endorse the avalanche hypothesis, others suggest military experimentation, while some entertain supernatural possibilities. Every explanation captures part of the story but leaves crucial gaps. Those gaps have made Dyatlov Pass a touchstone for those who study unexplained phenomena, human vulnerability, and the interaction between environment, psychology, and secrecy. The hikers themselves remain central to the story, their lives and personalities preserved in photographs, diaries, and the memories of those who knew them. Their youth, skill, and optimism stand in stark contrast to the brutal and mysterious end that they met. They embody the fragility of human life, the limits of knowledge, and the terrifying potential of forces beyond comprehension. The narrative of Dyatlov Pass is not just an event frozen in time, it is a meditation on uncertainty, fear, and the persistence of unanswered questions. As the snow continues to cover the slopes of Kholat-Syakhl, the mountain silently guards its secrets. Footprints vanish under new snowfall, evidence erodes, and human memory fades. Yet the story persists in cultural consciousness, in scholarly inquiry, and in the collective imagination of those drawn to unsolved mysteries. The Dyatlov Pass incident endures because it resists resolution, it challenges our assumptions, invites speculation, and evokes a fundamental unease with what cannot be explained. Perhaps the hikers were victims of chance, an extraordinary convergence of natural hazards and human error. Perhaps they encountered forces intentionally hidden, experimental, or supernatural. Or perhaps the full truth is forever inaccessible, buried under meters of snow, shrouded by the cold, and veiled by the indifference of the mountain. Whatever the answer, the incident remains a chilling reminder that even in the modern world, some events escape comprehension, and some places retain their mysteries beyond the reach of explanation. Their story, preserved in fragments of evidence, survives as both warning and fascination. It is a narrative of preparation and futility, of human ambition confronting forces unknown, and of the tension between documented fact and unexplainable phenomenon. The photographs, diaries, and surviving testimonies form a lattice through which the imagination can probe, but they cannot deliver certainty. The mountain keeps its secrets, the wind whispers across the slopes, and the snow erases all traces. The hikers' footsteps, their laughter, their terror, and their deaths are frozen in time, eternal and inaccessible. Dyatlov Pass remains a place of enduring mystery. Those who visit it today encounter silence and snow, yet the memory of the 9 lost hikers imbues the landscape with an uncanny presence. The mountain has witnessed events that defy explanation, and in doing so, it preserves a story that continues to captivate, haunt, and puzzle. The hiker's fate, enigmatic and multifaceted, reminds us that there are limits to human understanding, that some questions may never be answered, and that some tragedies transcend rational explanation. Even 60 years after the incident, the final question endures: what compelled 9 young hikers to leave their shelter in the dead of night, to face freezing temperatures barefoot, to succumb to forces both known and unknown? Was it natural disaster, human experimentation, psychological panic, or something entirely beyond comprehension? The mountain keeps its secrets, the snow erases their traces, and the story lives on, frozen in time and consciousness, a chilling testament to the unknown. The legacy of the Dyatlov Pass incident is therefore not merely historical, it is psychological, cultural, and existential. It challenges us to consider what lies beyond human understanding, to confront the fragility of life in extreme conditions, and to grapple with the uncomfortable possibility that some events resist closure. Every photograph, diary entry, and testimony is a fragment of a puzzle that may never be completed, yet together they form a narrative of terror, mystery, and haunting fascination that will endure as long as the snow falls on Kholat Syakhl and the mountain remains, silent, indifferent, and unknowable. And so, the 9 hikers remain frozen in time, their story a dark reflection of human vulnerability and the unknowable. The mountain stands, untouched, silent, guarding secrets that perhaps only it can comprehend. And for anyone who dares to ponder what occurred on that fateful night, the answer remains elusive, the mystery eternal, and the mountain patiently watching. Long after the snow had buried the footprints of the 9 hikers, the mountain of Kholat Syakhl seemed to watch silently, indifferent to the tragedy it had hosted. Those who visited the slopes decades later spoke of a peculiar atmosphere, a weight in the air, a tension that prickled the skin and unsettled the mind. Some claimed to hear noises carried by the wind, soft whispers, distant cracking, and the almost imperceptible creak of branches under invisible weight. The mountain, it seemed, remembered. It remembered the steps of those who dared to cross its slopes, the panic that overcame their disciplined minds, and the inexplicable forces that may have awaited them. The lives of the hikers themselves have been the subject of obsessive reconstruction, as if by knowing more about them one might unlock the mystery of their deaths. Igor Dyatlov was methodical, disciplined, and charismatic. He had a mind attuned to detail and a personality that inspired confidence among his peers. Zinaida Kolmogorova was resilient, organized, and deeply empathetic, often tending to the morale of the group. Rustam Slobodin had a quiet intensity, a focus that could shift seamlessly between technical skill and observation of the environment. Ludmila Dubinina was spirited and capable, yet some of her diary entries hinted at occasional unease during previous expeditions. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko had close bonds, often sharing tasks and ensuring the safety of the group, while Alexander Kolevatov, Semyon Zolotaryov, and Nikolai Thibault-Brignol added their own strengths, navigation, physical endurance, and strategic thinking. Each personality complemented the others, forming a group that seemed perfectly capable of surviving extreme conditions. And yet, on that night, every skill, every instinct, every ounce of preparation was rendered irrelevant. Some historians argue that small, almost imperceptible frictions among the group, combined with subtle misjudgments, could have contributed to their panic. But even such analyses cannot explain the ultimate chaos, the sheer irrationality that led them to abandon their tent in a snowstorm with minimal clothing. Diaries recovered later show no signs of conflict or hesitation. The final entries are mundane, detailing weather and route decisions. Whatever broke the equilibrium was sudden, pervasive, and perhaps external, a force that eclipsed human understanding. Eyewitness accounts from locals hint at phenomena that are harder to quantify. Munsee herders who had lived near Kholat Syakhl for generations spoke of lights in the sky, floating orbs that appeared without cause, darting rapidly across the horizon, sometimes descending to the slopes before vanishing. These reports, dismissed by some as folklore or superstition, gained an eerie weight when paired with official accounts of unusual aerial activity in the region. Military archives, now partially declassified, reveal that the northern Urals were a site for testing secret equipment, rockets, and radioactive materials. Could the hikers have stumbled upon a classified experiment, a demonstration of technology so secret that records were quickly suppressed and explanations intentionally vague? Physical evidence hints at anomalies beyond natural explanation. Several of the hikers' garments contain traces of radiation, levels high enough to be detected decades later yet inconsistent with known exposure sources. Some bodies bore crushing injuries, severe internal trauma without external marks. Dubinina, Kolevatov, Thibaut-Brignol, and Zolotaryov were found in positions suggesting that they had fallen or been forced into a ravine, yet the force required to cause such injuries could not have been produced by an avalanche of the size suggested by terrain models. Investigators speculated about infrasound, a natural phenomenon caused when wind passes through mountain formations producing frequencies capable of inducing irrational fear, vertigo, and panic. While infrasound could theoretically explain the hikers' flight from the tent, it cannot account for the internal trauma, the radiation, or the selective mutilation that confounded autopsies. In the cold, shadowed forest, attempts to start fires reveal something disturbing. Trees were broken, branches snapped as if under pressure, evidence of frenzied climbing or attempts to escape something unseen. Doroshenko and Krivonischenko's bodies were discovered near the cedar tree, frozen and partially clothed, suggesting that hypothermia had set in within hours of leaving the tent. Yet the expressions on their faces, captured in grainy black and white photographs, suggest a terror that cannot be fully described. Witnesses in later decades report that the local wind carries sounds across the slopes, producing phenomena reminiscent of those described in the diaries, cracking, low-frequency hums, and distant echoes that could be interpreted as voices or movement. Some theorists propose that a combination of factors produced an almost perfect storm of conditions. The mountain's topology may have created pockets of wind that induced infrasound, triggering panic. Simultaneously, an unexpected avalanche or snow slide may have forced the group to abandon shelter. Exposure to radioactive material or residual military experimentation could have induced physiological and neurological effects, exacerbating panic and confusion. Yet even this combination fails to explain the severity of the trauma, the missing body parts, or the apparent selective nature of injuries. Military involvement, long speculated but never confirmed, remains one of the most enduring theories. Declassified documents indicate that secret tests involving high-energy explosives and experimental devices were conducted in remote regions of the Urals during the late 1950s. Witnesses, now elderly, recall seeing trucks and convoys moving through isolated passes. Could the hikers have been in proximity to an accidental detonation or unintended exposure? Some documents suggest that information about unusual incidents was intentionally suppressed, and files related to Dyatlov Pass were sealed under national security until decades later. The coincidence of timing, location, and unexplained injuries lends credence to the idea that human interference played a role, yet no conclusive evidence has surfaced. Paranormal theories add an additional layer of intrigue. Some claim that the hikers may have been exposed to a previously unknown natural phenomenon, a force akin to geomagnetic or cosmic energy that affected both psychology and physiology. UFO enthusiasts point to reported lights and aerial anomalies, suggesting a possible extraterrestrial encounter. These interpretations remain speculative, yet they persist because they attempt to account for the combination of terror, trauma, and inexplicable phenomena observed in the aftermath. Psychologically, the hikers' behavior is equally puzzling. Footprints indicate that they removed clothing, perhaps in a paradoxical response to hypothermia, yet the extremity and sequence of these actions suggest more than simple physical response. The trajectory from tent to forest, the erratic paths, and attempts to return to camp suggest a state of extreme disorientation, compounded by environmental, physiological, and possibly external factors. The internal logic of their movements points to an overwhelming compulsion to flee or survive, yet the precise trigger for such behavior remains unknown. Yuri Yudin, whose absence from the final leg saved his life, reported long-term psychological effects. Dreams, flashbacks, and unshakable unease characterized his reflections. He described recurring images of the hikers fleeing into snow and darkness, faces frozen with terror, limbs moving with frantic energy. Even decades later, Yudin's accounts contained an almost tangible sense of horror, suggesting that the incident left an imprint not only on the physical landscape but on human memory itself. Investigations in the late 20th and early 21st centuries applied advanced forensic techniques. 3D terrain modeling, avalanche simulation, and environmental reconstructions attempted to recreate the conditions. These studies suggested that a slope failure or snow slide could have partially contributed to the deaths, yet again, anomalies persisted. Internal injuries remained unexplained, traces of radiation were inconsistent with environmental sources, and the selective nature of trauma could not be reproduced in experimental models. Researchers concluded that while environmental and human factors may explain some aspects, the full combination defies conventional reasoning. Even the most meticulous scientific models fail to capture the eerie, almost sentient quality attributed to the mountain by survivors and witnesses. The Monsi folklore, speaking of spirits or malevolent forces inhabiting Kholat Syakhl, intersects uneasily with scientific observations, strange lights, unexplained noises, and sudden shifts in weather or snow behavior. Some hypothesize that the mountain itself may act as an amplifier of natural forces, producing phenomena that challenge perception and rational explanation. Others suggest that localized cosmic or electromagnetic effects may have interacted with environmental hazards, producing unique psychological and physiological responses. The physical evidence also carries enigmatic clues. Clothing with high radiation traces, internal injuries inconsistent with any known natural force, and missing body parts remain central to speculation. Researchers have posited scenarios involving experimental weapons, clandestine military operations, or undisclosed scientific testing. Yet none of these can fully reconcile the complete set of anomalies. Every attempt at explanation opens new questions: why the timing? Why the selective injuries? Why the patterns of movement away from the tent? Why the apparent fear so acute that trained, experienced hikers abandoned shelter in lethal cold? Cultural interpretations have further enhanced the legend. Artists, filmmakers, and authors emphasize the psychological terror, the unseen forces, and the eerie inevitability of the hikers' deaths. The story of Dyatlov Pass now exists in multiple dimensions: historical record, scientific inquiry, folklore, and myth. Each lens offers insight, but none resolves the central question: what really occurred that night? Visitors to the site report sensations of unease, sudden drops in temperature, and auditory phenomena that echo descriptions from diaries and testimonies. Whether these are psychosomatic, environmental, or evidence of lingering unexplained forces remains open to interpretation. The ravine where Dubinina, Kolevatov, Thibaut-Brignol, and Zolotaryov were eventually found provides the most perplexing clues. Buried beneath meters of snow, their bodies showed signs of trauma so extreme that investigators initially speculated about a violent external force. Ribs crushed, skulls fractured, tongues and eyes missing, these were injuries inconsistent with typical cold-weather accidents. Even decades later, forensic experts struggle to provide explanations that satisfy both physics and logic. Some propose that the mountain itself, under certain rare conditions, might act as a pressure amplifier, producing localized forces sufficient to cause such injuries. Others insist on human involvement, a clandestine hand or secret experiment that left traces too subtle or too controlled to be documented. The question of radiation continues to fuel speculation. The hikers' clothing, particularly Dyatlov's and Dubinina's, tested positive for radioisotopes. Natural environmental exposure is unlikely at the levels detected. Military tests in the Ural region during the 1950s are documented, but there is no direct evidence linking the hikers' deaths to a specific experiment. This gap between plausibility and proof keeps the case alive in the realm of conspiracy, as enthusiasts and researchers search archives, interview former personnel, and examine the site for overlooked traces. Could the hikers have inadvertently entered a restricted zone where unrecorded testing occurred? Or is there a darker, more mysterious explanation, one that combines human error with phenomena beyond comprehension? Footprints in the snow offer further insight into the final hours. They show movement away from the tent in a seemingly random pattern, sometimes in groups, sometimes alone. At points, footprints appear to double back toward the tent, only to retreat again into the forest. Clothing appears to have been shed or lost during movement, some partially buried, some carried further along the slope. This behavior suggests a combination of hypothermic paradoxical undressing, extreme panic, and an almost instinctual drive to escape. Yet the underlying cause of the panic, the invisible, compelling force described in Soviet reports, remains unknown. Was it wind, avalanche, infrasound, radiation, or something else entirely? Or a combination so unique that it defies categorization? Yuri Yudin's testimony provides the human lens on these events. While he survived physically, the psychological imprint of the incident haunted him until his death. He described vivid dreams of friends fleeing into snow, of expressions contorted by terror, and of the cold that seemed almost alive, pressing on the body and mind simultaneously. Yudin's accounts hint at a dimension of experience inaccessible to conventional observation, suggesting that whatever force acted on the hikers was not purely physical. There is, in his words, a sense of intentionality in the mountain, a weight that bends perception, and a presence that drives irrational action. Local folklore amplifies this sense of malevolent intentionality. The Mwansi people speak of spirits that guard the mountain, punishing those who intrude upon sacred or forbidden places. Kholat Syakhl, the mountain of the dead, is said to induce fear and confusion, luring travelers into danger with illusions or whispers. While folkloric explanations may seem quaint, the consistency of such reports across generations is striking. Witnesses describe hearing voices where none exist, seeing lights in impossible configurations, and feeling inexplicable cold or pressure. Could the mountain possess characteristics that, in combination with natural forces, produce a near-supernatural effect on human perception? Military involvement remains one of the most persistent and controversial theories. Documents released decades later indicate experimental activity in remote regions of the northern Urals, including tests of rocket engines, high-energy explosives, and radioactive materials. Witnesses described convoy movement in the area around the time of the incident. Could the hikers have encountered an accidental detonation, an unrecorded radiation release, or a clandestine experiment? Some theorists suggest that a sonic or nuclear device may have been involved, creating both the fear-induced flight and the internal trauma observed in the bodies. Yet no concrete evidence has emerged to substantiate this hypothesis, leaving it suspended between plausibility and conjecture. The nature of the hikers' injuries is especially confounding. Crushed ribs and fractured skulls imply immense force, yet the absence of corresponding external damage challenges conventional physics. Some researchers propose that exposure to high-energy blasts, whether from military devices or unknown natural phenomena, could account for these injuries. Others consider rare atmospheric phenomena, such as intense infrasound or sudden pressure differentials, capable of producing trauma without leaving marks on the skin. Both explanations remain speculative, highlighting the persistent gap between observable evidence and theoretical reconstruction. Environmental factors alone are also insufficient. The Ural Mountains are harsh, but experienced hikers of Dyatlov's caliber had traversed them successfully in previous expeditions. Snow and wind can kill, but the selective pattern of injuries, the unusual shedding of clothing, and the flight into the open during sub-zero temperatures suggest an additional trigger. Psychological factors, such as fear amplified by isolation, disorientation, or sensory distortion, may have played a role. Yet, combined with radiation traces and anomalous injuries, these factors point to a convergence of elements so rare it challenges explanation. Sightings of strange lights and phenomena near Kholat Syakhl during that period deepen the mystery. Some claim to have seen floating spheres, glowing orbs, and flashes in the sky that correspond with the timeline of the hiker's disappearance. These reports are often dismissed as hallucinations, atmospheric reflections, or misinterpretations of natural events. Yet the number and consistency of such accounts lend weight to the possibility that something unusual, perhaps even anomalous in a physical or cosmic sense, occurred. Whether these lights were the cause of panic, incidental, or symbolic remains unknown. The story of Dyatlov Pass also reveals the limitations of official investigation. Soviet authorities, constrained by secrecy and bureaucracy, closed the case quickly, attributing deaths to an unknown compelling force. Witnesses were warned to remain silent, and some records remained classified. Families received minimal information, creating an enduring vacuum into which speculation and folklore rushed. The opacity of documentation fuels conspiracy theories, reinforcing the notion that human action, environmental phenomena, and perhaps deliberate cover-ups intersected to create a tragedy that remains partially obscured. Even today, Kholat Syakhl continues to inspire fear and fascination. Climbers and researchers who approached the site report disorientation, sudden shifts in temperature, and the eerie sensation of being watched. Snowfields appear ordinary, yet the air carries a palpable tension, as though memory and trauma persist in the environment itself. Such reports suggest that the mountain, beyond its physical dimensions, exerts a subtle psychological influence, reinforcing the impression that the events of February 1959 were not solely accidental or natural. Photographs recovered from the hikers' cameras remain haunting. Smiling faces, laughter, and camaraderie juxtapose sharply with the aftermath frozen in snow. These images create a dissonance that amplifies the story's eeriness, the contrast between life and death, anticipation and sudden catastrophe, control and chaos. Even decades later, these photographs are studied for clues, for patterns, for hints of premonition. Some researchers examine hand positioning, gaze direction, or group dynamics, searching for subtle indications of awareness or foreboding that might shed light on the hikers' final hours. The psychological and cultural impact is undeniable. Dyatlov Pass has become a locus of legend, blending scientific investigation with folklore and conspiracy. Its narrative transcends mere history, entering the realms of myth and existential reflection. The hikers' deaths illustrate the fragility of human life, the unpredictability of extreme environments, and the persistence of mystery in the face of rational inquiry. They challenge assumptions about control, preparation, and human understanding, reminding us that some events elude complete comprehension. Decades of scientific analysis continue to yield new interpretations, yet the central questions remain. How could 9 skilled hikers, trained for extreme conditions, abandon their tent in sub-zero temperatures? What caused the extreme internal trauma and selective injuries observed in some bodies? Were military experiments, cosmic phenomena, infrasound, or psychological panic involved? Or does the answer lie in a combination so complex that it defies isolation, a convergence of human, environmental, and unknown forces? The mountain, unchanging and indifferent, preserves these questions, offering no answers, only speculation and unease. In some ways, the Dyatlov Pass incident is a meditation on the limits of knowledge. No matter how meticulously the terrain is analyzed, how closely photographs are studied, or how rigorously simulations are run, gaps remain. Each fragment of evidence, footprints, diaries, photographs, autopsy reports, provides insight yet simultaneously deepens the mystery. The mountain, the weather, the unknown forces at play, and human psychology intersect in ways that resist closure. For those who investigate, this intersection produces both fascination and frustration, a reminder that reality sometimes exceeds the boundaries of understanding. The mountain also embodies a temporal ambiguity. What unfolded in 1959 feels both immediate and eternal. Snowfall erases footprints in hours, yet the memory of the event persists in cultural consciousness. Diaries, photographs, and survivor testimony provide a bridge between time and experience, yet they are incomplete. Each investigation uncovers fragments, yet the mountain guards the full truth. Even as decades pass, the slopes of Kholat Syakhl remain a repository of unanswered questions, where history, fear, and speculation coexist in frozen equilibrium. In conclusion, the Dyatlov Pass narrative, extended into the realms of speculation and conspiracy, illustrates the profound tension between knowledge and mystery. The hikers' lives, preparation, and camaraderie contrast sharply with the inexplicable nature of their deaths. Environmental hazards, psychological factors, folklore, military secrecy, and perhaps unknown forces combine to create a story that is both grounded in historical fact and imbued with eerie uncertainty. Their deaths are a stark reminder of human vulnerability, the power of the natural and possibly supernatural world, and the enduring fascination of what cannot be fully understood.